in the gilded heart of Vienna's moonlit gardens, where lanterns sway above the Danube and secrets bloom in every shadow. A priceless count lies stabbed through the heart beneath the yew arch. A single red rose between his lips under the autumn moon. But when the suicide note is typed on the wrong machine, the pistol grips the wrong hand, and the night-blooming poison drips from a valet's glass. The star of the Gartenpalast vanishes like smoke. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster from Danemed Cottage, whose village eyes unravel a web of forged vineyards, blackmail and betrayal. A second shot echoes in the orangery, a princess with bloodied pearls, and a botanist guarding a deadly Sirius. Who placed the rose of death? Greed or loyalty? Chapter 1. The Telegram. Miss Jane Marple sat in the small square morning room of Danemed Cottage, the autumn sun striking obliquely through the latticed window and laying a pattern of diamonds across the Turkey rug. On the table before her lay the morning's post, 2 seed catalogues, a bill from the ironmonger, and a charity appeal illustrated with a mournful child. She had just decided that the child's expression was not unlike that of Mrs. Price Ridley, when the maid entered with a yellow envelope on a silver tray. "Telegram, ma'am, from abroad, by the stamps." Miss Marple's fingers, precise as ever, slit the envelope with the paper knife she kept for that purpose. The message was brief, typed in continental fashion with the date at the head. Vienna 14. OTT come at once. Trouble at the Gartenpalast. Bring your eyes. L. She read it twice, then folded it with the same care she gave to her finer lace. Lady Letitia Blaine, Letty Carstairs that had been, had always possessed a dramatic turn of phrase, but telegrams were expensive, and Letty had never been extravagant. Miss Marple rang the bell. "Ask Mrs. Bantry if she would step around for coffee," she told the maid, "and tell cook we shall need the Madeira cake." Mrs. Bantry, large, kindly, and comfortably untidy, arrived within the quarter hour. She listened without interruption while Miss Marple recounted the telegram, turning it over in plump fingers as though it might reveal more on the reverse. "Gartenpalast," she said at last. "Sounds Austrian. You remember Letty married that diplomat, Blaine, wasn't it? And went to live in some castle on the Danube. She wrote to me once about nightingales and a ghost in the West Wing. Do you suppose the ghost has finally done someone in?" Miss Marple permitted herself a faint smile. "Ghosts rarely send telegrams, Dolly." Mrs. Bantry considered. "You will go, of course." "I have already consulted the railway guide. The Orient Express leaves Victoria at 10:30 tomorrow evening. One changes at Paris and again at Munich. I shall be in Vienna by Friday noon." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "But Jane, your tickets, your passport." "My passport is in the left-hand drawer of the bureau, renewed last year when Raymond took me to Florence. As for tickets, Thomas Cook's office opens at 9. I shall walk down after breakfast." Mrs. Bantry studied her friend. The white hair was neatly netted, the grey eyes mild behind steel spectacles, the lavender wool dress as unassuming as a curate's sermon. Yet something in the set of the small mouth suggested that Miss Marple had already begun to arrange facts in her mind the way another woman might arrange flowers. "You will need warm things," Mrs. Bantry said practically. "Vienna is cold in October, and someone to see to your trunks." "I shall take the small cabin trunk and the brown leather dressing case. Cherry can manage the labels." Mrs. Bantry hesitated. "Jane, are you quite sure? You have not left the village in 2 years, except for that unfortunate business at the hydro." Miss Marple folded her knitting, the needles clicking once like a quiet decision. "Letty asks for my eyes, Dolly. She means the ones that notice what other people overlook. In Little Paddocks we had a case of anonymous letters, remember? And the clue was a blot of violet ink on a laundry list. I have a feeling that whatever has happened at the Garten Palast will be a matter of small things wrongly placed." Mrs. Bantry sighed. "Very well, but you will wire if you need anything. And mind you do not let these foreigners bully you. You are worth a dozen of their inspectors." Miss Marple rose. "I must see to my black silk. The one with the jet beading will do for evenings. And I shall take the grey tweed for travelling. Warm, and it does not show the smuts." That afternoon the village saw Miss Marple at the post office, purchasing Austrian shillings with the calm of a woman buying stamps for a penny postcard. The postmistress, agog, ventured, "Going abroad, Miss Marple?" "To Vienna," Miss Marple replied, counting the notes. "An old friend is in difficulties." By evening the cabin trunk stood corded in the hall, the dressing-case packed with admirable neatness. 2 nightgowns, 1 cardigan, 1 bottle of lavender water, 1 volume of Pascal's Pensées for the train, and wrapped in tissue, a small mother-of-pearl revolver that had belonged to her brother in the Indian Army. She had never fired it, but one never knew. At 10 o'clock she took a final turn about the garden. The Michaelmas daisies were over, the chrysanthemums just beginning. A faint mist rose from the fish pond. Somewhere a late rose exhaled its sweetness into the dark. Miss Marple paused beneath the mulberry tree and looked up at the quiet stars. "Human nature," she murmured to the night, "is much the same in Vienna as in Little Paddocks. Only the scenery changes." She went indoors, locked the door, and set the alarm for 6. The Orient Express, she reflected, as she climbed the stairs, was said to be very punctual. Chapter 2. Arrival at the Garten Palast. The Orient Express drew into the Westbahnhof with a sigh of steam, and a metallic shriek that set Miss Marple's teeth on edge. She had slept remarkably well considering the circumstances. The gentle sway of the wagonlit, the rhythmic clatter over the points, and the muted conversation of 2 Hungarian commercial travellers in the next compartment had combined to produce a state not far removed from her own bed at Danemead Cottage. She awoke at dawn to find the Danube sliding past the window like a broad ribbon of pewter, the vineyards on its banks already touched with frost. A porter in a green baize apron seized her cabin trunk with the enthusiasm of a man who expected a generous tip. Miss Marple surrendered it without demur, retaining only the brown leather dressing case and a small string bag containing her knitting. She had chosen a travelling costume of dove-grey tweed, severely plain except for a discreet brooch of amethysts at the throat. The ensemble proclaimed, as clearly as any passport, that she was English, elderly, and not to be trifled with. Outside the station the air struck sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and roasting chestnuts. A motor car awaited her, an immense open Daimler, whose chauffeur wore the scarlet facings of the Garten Palast livery. He touched his cap. "Fräulein Marple, Lady Blaine expects you." The drive took them through streets still medieval in outline, though the facades had been scrubbed and gilded until they glittered like confectionery. St. Stephen's spire pricked the sky. The giant wheel in the Prater turned lazily against a backdrop of copper beeches. Presently, the car swung between stone pillars topped with stone urns overflowing with ivy. and the garden palace itself rose before them. 3 stories of pale yellow stucco, balconies wrought like lace, a fountain in the forecourt, where bronze dolphins spouted into a basin of black marble. Miss Marple descended. The gravel crunched beneath her sensible low-heeled shoes. A footman in powder-blue livery relieved her of the dressing-case. Another swung open a door tall enough for a cavalry charge. She found herself in a hall panelled in pale oak, the air heavy with beeswax and the faint, sweet breath of hothouse lilies. A chandelier of Waterford glass dripped light onto a marble floor inlaid with a compass rose. From somewhere above came the subdued strains of a string quartet rehearsing Strauss. Lady Letitia Blaine appeared at the head of the grand staircase, as though she had been waiting behind a curtain for her cue. She had once been a Juno-esque beauty. Now the bones showed too prominently, and the famous Blaine sapphires looked almost vulgar against the pallor of her throat. She wore black chiffon, an incongruous choice for noon, and her rings flashed like distress signals as she descended. "Jane." Her voice cracked on the single syllable. "You came." Miss Marple suffered herself to be embraced. Lady Letitia smelled of violet, powder, and something sharper. Fear, perhaps. "My dear Letty, you're overwrought. A cup of tea, I think, and then you shall tell me everything." Lady Letitia gave a brittle laugh. "Tea. The servants are Austrian. They will bring coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in. Come to the palm court. It is quieter." They passed through an archway hung with ferns in majolica pots. The palm court was a glass-roofed conservatory overlooking the gardens. Canaries in gilded cages trilled above the tinkle of porcelain. A dozen small tables were occupied by persons who might have stepped from the pages of Vogue or the Illustrated Police News. A dowager in sable, a young man with a monocle and a dueling scar, an American couple arguing in loud undertones about exchange rates. Lady Letitia chose a table beneath a Kentia palm and sank into a chair as though her knees had given way. A waiter materialized, white-aproned, deferential. Lady Letitia ordered café complète for 2. Miss Marple requested hot water and a slice of lemon. When the waiter had gone, Lady Letitia leaned forward. "He is dead, Jane. Shot through the heart at midnight in the Moonlit Gardens. The police say suicide. I say," she broke off, twisting a lace handkerchief into a knot. Miss Marple observed the handkerchief real Valenciennes, but the monogram was LC, not LB. A relic of Letty's first marriage, then. She filed the detail away. "Begin at the beginning," she said gently. "Who is he?" "Count Felix von Artenburg. He was owning, the hotel, the vineyards, half the opera boxes in Vienna. He was giving a house party. 20 guests, more or less. I am the hostess. My husband is in England with a chill. Last night, after the ball, Felix went for a walk in the gardens. The shot was heard at 5 minutes past 12. The night porter found him under the yew arch. Pistol beside the right hand, note in the pocket. Suicide, they say." Miss Marple's lemon arrived. She sipped, considering. "And the note?" Lady Letitia fumbled in her reticule and produced a folded sheet of heavy cream paper. Miss Marple unfolded it with care. The message was typewritten in German. "Verzeih mir. Die Vergangenheit ist schwerer als die Zukunft." Beneath, in ink, a single scrawled initial. "The police have the original," Lady Letitia said. "This is a copy. Inspector Keller allowed me one glance." Miss Marple studied the paper. The typewriter ribbon was new, The letter O was slightly out of alignment. The fold was crisp, the edges sharp. She returned it. And the pistol, an old duelling piece from the Count's collection, kept in a glass case in the library. Anyone might have taken it. The coffee arrived, accompanied by tiny almond biscuits dusted with sugar. Miss Marple declined the biscuits. Lady Letitia devoured 3 in rapid succession. "Tell me about the guests," Miss Marple said. Lady Letitia's recitation was rapid, almost breathless. There was Princess Irina Dolgoruki, White Russian, penniless but proud, who claimed the Count had promised her first refusal on the vineyards. Mr. Silas P. Hartman, American wine merchant from Chicago, loud, generous, and determined to buy the same vineyards outright. Frau Dr. Lise von Hoffmann, botanist, engaged in some mysterious research involving night-blooming plants. She had quarrelled with the Count over a rare Cereus. Captain the Andre Rupert Blaine, Letitia's nephew by her first marriage, charming, dissolute, and in debt to the tune of 30,000 shillings. Finally, Maître Antoine, the Count's valet, a Frenchman of impeccable discretion and ambiguous loyalty. Miss Marple listened, her grey eyes apparently fixed on the canaries. In reality, she noted the tremor in Lady Letitia's left eyelid, the way her fingers worried the sapphire on her right hand, the faint smear of crimson lipstick on the coffee cup. Lipstick which did not quite match the shade on Lady Letitia's mouth. "And the gardens?" she asked. "You mentioned Moonlight." Lady Letitia shivered. "They are famous. Laid out in the 18th century by the Archduchess Maria Christina. Yew hedges, marble statues, a fountain of Narcissus. At night the paths are lit by lanterns in coloured glass. The yew arch is at the far end, near the orangery. Felix loved to walk there when he could not sleep." Miss Marple finished her lemon water. "I should like to see my room, Letty, and then the gardens. After that, perhaps a word with Inspector Keller." Lady Letitia rose with alacrity. "Your suite overlooks the fountain. I had them put you in the lilac room, quiet, and the bathroom has hot water all day." They ascended a secondary staircase, carpeted in aubusson. The lilac room was exactly that. Walls papered in a delicate sprig pattern. A four-poster hung with silk the colour of wood smoke. A writing desk already supplied with the hotel's crested stationery. On the mantelpiece stood a bowl of Michaelmas daisies. Someone had remembered her fondness for the flower. Miss Marple set down her dressing-case and opened the window. The air carried the scent of box and damp earth. Below, the gardens spread in formal parterres. Clipped yews, gravel walks, a long vista terminated by the dark tunnel of the yew arch. Even at this distance, she could see the chalk marks where the police had outlined the body. Lady Letitia hovered. "You will rest. The gong sounds at 7:30 for dinner." Miss Marple turned from the window. "I am not tired, Letty, but I should like to walk in the gardens before the light fails. Alone, if you please." Lady Letitia hesitated, then produced a key from her reticule. "The side door from the conservatory. It locks behind you. The police have finished. The gardeners swept the paths this morning. Be careful, the steps to the lower terrace are slippery." Miss Marple accepted the key. "One more thing. The Count, was he left-handed?" Lady Letitia frowned. "Why, yes. He always signed his name with the left. How did you know?" Miss Marple permitted herself the ghost of a smile. "One notices these things. Now, run along, Letty. I shall join you presently." When the door closed, Miss Marple opened her dressing-case and took out a small Morocco notebook and a propelling pencil. On the first page she wrote, in her neat slanting hand, Count F. von A., left-handed, pistol beside right hand. Note typed, new ribbon, O misaligned. Guests' motives various. Gardens, yew-arch, moonlight, chalk marks. She underlined the word moonlight twice, closed the book, and slipped it into her pocket. Then, drawing on a pair of soft kid gloves, she descended to the conservatory and let herself out into the autumn afternoon. The gardens breathed quiet. A gardener in a blue smock raked leaves into fragrant heaps. Somewhere a fountain played. Miss Marple followed the main walk, noting the coloured lanterns now unlit, the statues veiled in shadow. At the yew arch she paused. The chalk marks were still visible, the outline of a man lying supine, head towards the orangery, feet pointing to the rose garden. A single red rose had been crushed into the gravel. Its petals lay like drops of blood. Miss Marple knelt, heedless of her tweed skirt, and examined the ground. The gravel had been raked, but not perfectly. Here a heel had twisted, leaving a crescent scrape. There a deeper indentation suggested the pressure of a knee. She took an envelope from her pocket and with the pencil tip lifted something small and gleaming. A pearl earring, the clasp broken. She sealed it in the envelope and wrote on the outside, Yew Arch, gravel, 4:15 p.m. Rising, she brushed gravel from her gloves and looked about. The yew hedge was dense, impenetrable, but a narrow gap to the left led to a secondary path. She followed it. 10 paces along, a scrap of lilac silk fluttered from a thorn. She secured that also. The path emerged near the orangery, a long glass structure where exotic plants pressed against the panes. Through the glass, she glimpsed a woman in a white coat bending over a table of seedlings. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann, no doubt. Miss Marple made a note of the time, 4:27, and retraced her steps. By the time she regained the hotel, the lamps were lit, and the first evening star hung above the fountain. She felt the familiar tingling at the base of her spine, the sense that a pattern was beginning to form, like the first rows of a complicated knitting stitch. Somewhere in these immaculate gardens, a small fatal discrepancy had occurred. She intended to find it. In the hall she encountered a tall man in a dark overcoat, Homburg hat in hand. He bowed with military precision. Fräulein Marple, Inspector Keller, Sicherheitsdirektion. Lady Blaine tells me you are interested in botany. Miss Marple regarded him mildly. In human nature, Inspector. Botany is merely the setting. Keller's eyes narrowed. Then perhaps you will honour me with your observations tomorrow. At 10 o'clock, in the library. I shall be there, Miss Marple said. And passed on upstairs, the pearl earring and the scrap of silk safe in her pocket, and the faint, sweet scent of crushed rose petals clinging to the hem of her tweed skirt. Chapter 3. The Body in the Moonlight. The library of the Gartenpalast smelled of Morocco leather, cigar ash, and the peculiar mustiness that clings to books which have been handled by too many gloved fingers. At 10 o'clock precisely, Inspector Keller closed the double doors with a soft click that sounded, to Miss Marple's attentive ear, like the setting of a trap. He was a spare man of middle height, with a moustache trimmed to the fraction of a millimetre, and eyes the colour of wet slate. He laid a folder on the mahogany table and opened it with the reverence of a priest unveiling a reliquary. You wish to see the scene, Fräulein. I permit it, but first, the facts. He spoke German with the careful precision of a man who had learned English from textbooks, and wished to display the accomplishment. Miss Marple inclined her head. The Count was discovered at 12:17 by Johann the night porter, Keller continued. Johann heard the shot at 12:05. He was in the service corridor, polishing boots. He ran. He found the Count lying thus. He placed a photograph on the table. The image was stark. Moonlight, chalk outline, the glint of a pistol barrel. The Count's evening cloak had fallen open. The white tie and waistcoat were immaculate, except for a small dark hole at the left breast. His right hand, gloved in pale suede, lay palm upward beside the pistol. Between the cold lips, someone had placed a single red rose, its stem broken short. Miss Marple bent closer. The rose was a hybrid tea, variety crimson glory. She recognized the velvet texture of the petals. The pistol was a flintlock dueling piece, the barrel octagonal, the stock inlaid with silver wire. A powder burn ringed the entry wound, but the glove on the right hand showed no corresponding stippling. She made a small notation in her Morocco book. "The note," she said. Keller produced a second photograph. The cream paper lay on a blotter. The typed message was exactly as Lady Letitia had copied it. Beneath the scrawled initial, the paper was faintly creased, as though it had been folded while the ink was still wet. "Fingerprints?" Miss Marple asked. "Only the Count's on the pistol. Smudged on the note, the rose stem clean." Miss Marple looked up. "And the glove on the left hand?" Keller hesitated. "Removed by the police surgeon. Beneath it, the hand was bare. No powder residue." Miss Marple closed the book. "I should like to see the body now." The police surgeon, Dr. Weiss, awaited them in a small anteroom that had once been a chapel. The Count lay on a trestle table beneath a sheet. When the sheet was drawn, back Miss Marple saw a man of perhaps 55, the face thin and aristocratic, the hair iron-grey at the temples. Rigour had passed. The limbs were supple. The bullet had entered just below the 5th rib and exited beneath the left shoulder blade, carrying with it a fragment of silk lining from the dress coat. "Instantaneous?" she asked. Dr. Weiss shrugged. The heart was pierced. Death within seconds. Miss Marple examined the hands. The left was manicured, the nails buffed. A heavy signet ring bore the Artenburg crest. The right hand showed a faint callus at the base of the middle finger. Writer's callus, but on the left hand one would expect it. She turned the right palm upward. Between the second and third knuckles lay a minute speck of green, verdigris, perhaps from the pistol's silver inlay. "May I see the pistol again?" Keller produced it in a glassine envelope. Miss Marple held it to the light. The lock was clean, the barrel recently oiled. She sniffed delicately. The sharp tang of gunpowder lingered, but beneath it something sweeter. Jasmine, perhaps, or the attar of roses. They left the anteroom and proceeded to the gardens. The morning was bright, almost harsh. Dew still sparkled on the box hedges. Johann the night porter led the way, a stout man with a walrus moustache and the stoical air of one who has seen everything twice. He carried a bunch of keys the size of a dinner plate. "The Count often walked here," he said, unlocking a wrought-iron gate. "He suffered from insomnia. Said the night air cleared the head." The moonlit gardens lay beyond a sunken rose garden, where the last blooms of autumn drooped heavy with scent. The yew arch rose before them, dark and secretive. Johann halted. "Here, gnädige Frau." The chalk marks had been washed away by the gardeners, but the gravel still bore the faint imprint of the body. Miss Marple walked slowly around the arch. On the inner curve of the left buttress, She found what she sought. A small, deliberate scratch in the bark, no more than an inch long, but fresh. She took a lens from her pocket and examined it. The scratch revealed the pale wood beneath. At its lower end clung a thread of lilac silk. Keller watched impassively. "You find something?" "Someone stood here," Miss Marple said. "Someone wearing lilac who caught a sleeve on the U. The height, 5'6", perhaps 5'7". The scratch is at shoulder level." Johann cleared his throat. "The Princess Irina wore lilac last night, and Frau Dr. von Hoffmann has a coat of that colour." Miss Marple nodded. She moved to the gravel. The raking had been thorough, but near the edge of the path a single pebble had been displaced, revealing a darker patch beneath. She knelt and touched it with a gloved finger. The gravel was damp, but not from dew. The stain was rust brown. "Blood," Keller said. "A few drops only. The exit wound bled little." Miss Marple looked up at the U. Ouch! The Count was a tall man, 6 feet, I should say. The entry wound is low on the chest. If he shot himself, the pistol would have been held thus. She demonstrated, raising her right hand to her own breast. The angle would be downward. Yet the exit wound is higher. Curious. Keller's moustache twitched. The body may have fallen awkwardly. Or been arranged afterwards. Miss Marple rose. "Tell me, Inspector, was the Count in the habit of carrying a red rose?" Johann answered. "Never. He disliked cut flowers. Said they belonged in the earth." They walked on. The path curved toward the orangery, its glass panes misted with condensation. Through them Miss Marple glimpsed movement. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann, coat unbuttoned, hair escaping from its severe knot, bending over a plant with white, waxy blooms. The serious, no doubt. Keller followed her gaze. "The doctor claims she was in the greenhouse from 11 until 1, photographing the flowering. The head gardener confirms she arrived at 11:15, but the door log shows an exit at 11:47 and re-entry at 12:03. 16 minutes unaccounted for." Miss Marple considered. Enough time to walk here, fire a shot, and return. Barely. The shot was heard at 12:05. They emerged into the rose garden. Here the beds were mulched with cocoa shells. The air was thick with the scent of decay and sweetness. Miss Marple paused beside a standard rose labelled Crimson Glory. One bloom had been snapped off close to the stem. The break was fresh, the sap still beading. Keller noticed it too. The rose on the Count's lips. Miss Marple nodded. She took the envelope from her pocket and compared the broken stem with the fragment in the photograph. The match was exact. Johann shifted his weight. "There is more, gnädige Frau. The Count's cloak. When I found him, the cape was thrown back, but the lower corner was caught beneath his left heel, as though he had been dragged a pace or two." Miss Marple looked at the gravel. The raking had obliterated drag marks. But near the arch, the pebbles were pressed in a shallow furrow, no more than 6 inches long. She measured it with her eye. "Dragged by someone shorter than himself," she said. "The cape would catch thus if the body were pulled backward by the shoulders." Keller's eyes narrowed. "You suggest murder." "I suggest," Miss Marple said mildly, "that a man who shoots himself in the heart does not usually place a rose in his own mouth afterward. Nor does he drag himself 6 inches across gravel." A silence fell, broken only by the distant chime of the hotel clock striking 11. Keller closed his notebook. "You will dine with us tonight, Fräulein. The house party assembles in the Red Salon at 7. Perhaps you will observe." Miss Marple inclined her head. "I should like to change my shoes first. Gravel is treacherous." As they retraced their steps, Johann lingered. When Keller was out of earshot, he said in a low voice, "The Count, he was not himself last night. He drank 3 glasses of Tokay after dinner, though he usually took one. And he spoke to Maître Antoine in the library. Angry words, I think. I heard the door slam." Miss Marple thanked him. In the hall she paused beneath the chandelier to shake a pebble from her shoe. It was a small, smooth stone, but on one side it bore a fleck of dried blood and a single strand of pale gold hair. She wrapped it in her handkerchief and climbed the stairs, her mind busy with angles, roses, and the precise distance from the orangery door to the yew arch. Chapter 4. The Suspects Assemble. The red salon of the Gartenpalast was a room designed to intimidate. Crimson damask covered the walls. Above the marble chimney-piece, a portrait of the Emperor Franz Joseph glowered down upon a company already sufficiently ill at ease. A fire crackled with unnecessary vigour, for the evening was mild, and the scent of applewood smoke mingled uneasily with the perfumes of the guests. At precisely 7:30, the double doors were thrown open, and Herr Director Kraus entered with the air of a stage manager who has rehearsed the scene 100 times. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in faultless French, "dinner will be served in the Winter Garden. First, a glass of champagne, in memory of Count von Artenburg." He clapped his hands. Footmen circulated with trays of tulip glasses. Miss Marple, seated in a corner beside a potted aspidistra, accepted a glass of plain seltz. She had changed into black silk with a modest fichu of lace. The jet beads at her throat caught the light whenever she turned her head, which was often. She observed. Lady Letitia stood near the fireplace, flanked by her nephew Captain Rupert Blaine. The young man's evening clothes were faultless, but the knot of his white tie had been retied twice and still betrayed a tremor. His eyes, pale blue, slightly bloodshot, flicked continually toward the door. Princess Irina Dolgoruki occupied a sofa of gilded walnut, her lilac chiffon gown arranged in calculated folds. A diamond dog collar flashed at her throat. Her cigarette holder was of carved jade. She laughed at something Mr. Silas P. Hartman said, but the laugh did not reach her eyes. Hartman himself was a study in transatlantic exuberance. His dinner jacket strained across shoulders that had never known a tailor's restraint. A diamond the size of a hazelnut glittered in his shirt front. He spoke loudly, punctuating each sentence with a gesture that threatened the crystal chandelier. "Say, Princess, if the old boy had sold me those vineyards, I'd have made him a millionaire twice over. Guess somebody didn't like the idea." Frau Dr. Lisa von Hoffmann stood apart, a glass of water in her hand. She wore severe black wool, relieved only by a cameo brooch. Her hair was drawn back so tightly that it seemed to stretch, the skin across her cheekbones. She did not drink. Maître Antoine, impeccable in evening dress, moved among the guests with the silent efficiency of a shadow, refilling glasses, adjusting a chair, his dark eyes cataloguing every gesture. Miss Marple sipped her seltz and listened. The conversation circled the dead man like moths around a candle. "Owed him 30,000 shillings, Captain Blaine was saying to Hartman. "Cards, you know. The Count was devilish lucky at écarté." "Or you were devilish unlucky," Hartman replied with a booming laugh. "I'd have paid cash for the vines, no gambling required." Princess Irina exhaled a perfect smoke ring. Felix promised me first refusal. A gentleman's word, he said. Gentlemen do not break promises, unless they are dead. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann set her glass down with a click. The Count interfered with scientific progress. That serious specimen was unique. He threatened to destroy it rather than allow my research. Lady Letitia's voice cut across the murmurs. Please, Felix was my guest. Let us not speak ill of the dead. The doors opened again. Inspector Keller entered, accompanied by a younger officer in plain clothes. Conversation ceased, as though a tap had been turned off. Good evening, Keller said. I regret the intrusion. A few questions only. Fräulein Marple, perhaps you will assist. Miss Marple rose. Of course, Keller addressed the room. Last night, between 11:30 and 12:15, where was each of you? A rustle of silk and starched linen. Captain Blaine spoke first. I was in the billiard room with Mr. Hartmann until 11:45. Then I went to my room, alone. Hartmann nodded. Billiards. Lost 50 shillings to the captain. After that I walked in the garden. Needed air. Saw no one. Princess Irina flicked ash into a Sèvres dish. I retired at 11. My maid can confirm. I read until midnight, then slept. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann's voice was clipped. Greenhouse. The cereus flowered at 11:12. I photographed it at intervals until 1 o'clock. The head gardener was present throughout. Maître Antoine inclined his head. I prepared the Count's nightcap, Tokay and soda, at 11:25. He took it in the library. I then retired to my pantry. Lady Letitia clasped her hands. I was in my sitting room writing letters. My maid brought me hot milk at 11:50. Keller made notes. Miss Marple studied faces. Captain Blaine's left eyelid twitched. Princess Irina's cigarette trembled between her fingers. Frau Doctor's cameo rose and fell with her breathing. Hartmann alone seemed at ease, but his eyes were watchful. Keller closed his notebook. Thank you. Dinner awaits. The company filed into the winter garden, a vast glass pavilion where orchids drooped from baskets and a fountain played among ferns. The table was laid for 8. The Count's place at the head remained empty. A single red rose laid across the plate. Miss Marple was seated between Lady Letitia and Maître Antoine. Opposite, Princess Irina toyed with a langouste canapé. Soup was served, consommé royal, fragrant with sherry. Miss Marple tasted it and set down her spoon. Tell me, Princess, she said conversationally, do you use attar of roses? The Princess raised an eyebrow. Jicky by Guerlain. Why? A delicate scent. I noticed it in the gardens this afternoon. Princess Irina's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I was in my room. Of course. Miss Marple turned to Maître Antoine. The Count's Tokay. Was it his usual? The valet's eyes flickered. He asked for 3 glasses instead of 1. I thought it unusual. Trout followed, then saddle of venison with chestnut puree. Conversation lagged. The fountain's plash sounded unnaturally loud. Hartmann attempted a joke about American efficiency and Austrian punctuality. No one laughed. Coffee was served in the adjoining yellow salon. Miss Marple declined liqueurs and asked for China tea. While the others gathered around the samovar, she slipped away to the ladies' cloakroom. There, in the marble hush, she opened her reticule and took out the Morocco notebook. She added Captain Beam billiards until 11:45 alone after. Hartmann, garden after 11:45. Princess Bar room, maid confirms to 11:50. Frau Dr. H, greenhouse, but 16 mins unaccounted. Antoine, pantry after 11:25. Lady L. Sitting room, milk, 11:50. She underlined the word Tokay. Returning, she found the party breaking up. Lady Letitia touched her arm. Jane, you are very silent. What do you think? Miss Marple patted her hand. I think, my dear, that someone in this room is lying about the time, and someone else is lying about the rose. Upstairs in the lilac room, she locked the door and opened the window. The gardens lay silver under a waxing moon. The yew arch was a black tunnel. She took from her dressing case a small torch and a pair of overshoes. At 11:30 she slipped down the service stairs, avoiding the night porter by way of the linen room. The side door opened with the key Lady Letitia had given her. The night air was cold, her breath plumed. She followed the gravel path, torch beam low. At the yew arch, she knelt again. The blood fleck had dried to a dark crust. She scraped it gently into an envelope. Then, moving to the rosebed, she examined the broken crimson glory. The stem had been snapped, not cut. The break was ragged. She measured the height, 4 feet 6 inches from the ground, a footstep on gravel. She switched off the torch and stepped into the shadow of the yew. A figure approached, tall, male, carrying something that glinted. Captain Blaine. He knelt where the body had lain, felt about in the gravel, then rose with a muttered oath. He had found nothing. Miss Marple waited until his footsteps faded. Then she returned to the Bid Hotel, overshoes in hand, the envelope of dried blood safe in her pocket. In her room she added one more line to the notebook. 11:47 p.m. Captain B searching yew arch. Looking for what? She undressed, said her prayers, and slept as soundly as though she were in her own bed at Danemid Cottage. The moon pouring white across the counterpane, and the gardens keeping their secrets until morning. Chapter 5. The Midnight Walk. Miss Marple woke at 3 minutes past 11, the hour she had set in her mind rather than on any clock. The lilac room was dark, except for a bar of moonlight that lay across the carpet like a silver ruler. She rose without lighting the lamp, slipped her feet into felt slippers, and drew on the woolen dressing gown that had accompanied her to Switzerland in 1913 and to Torquay in 1927. From the dressing case, she took the small electric torch, a clean handkerchief, and the envelope containing the blood-flecked gravel. Thus equipped, she let herself out by the service stair. The corridor smelled of floor polish and extinguished gas. A clock ticked somewhere with the solemnity of a judge. She descended 2 flights, avoiding the creaking 3rd step, and reached the conservatory door. The key turned sweetly. Lady Letitia had oiled it. Outside, the gardens breathed frost. The coloured lanterns were unlit, but the moon was almost full, and the gravel paths glimmered like mother of pearl. Miss Marple kept to the grass verge to muffle her footfalls. She had no very clear plan, only the conviction that night would reveal what daylight had concealed. She made first for the yew arch. The chalk marks were gone, washed away by dew and the gardener's zeal, but the gravel still bore faint indentations. She knelt, torch shielded by her body, and examined the crescent scrape she had noted earlier. It pointed inward, toward the arch, as though a heel had pivoted. Beside it lay a single pearl, smaller than the earring she had found, but identical in lustre. She wrapped it in the handkerchief. A breath of perfume reached her, a tar of roses unmistakable. She switched off the torch and stood motionless. From the direction of the orangery came the soft closing of a glass door. Footsteps, light and rapid, crossed the gravel and halted at the rosebed. A match flared. In its brief glare, Miss Marple saw Princess Irina, a dark cloak over her lilac gown, cigarette glowing like a firefly. The princess bent, searched among the stems, then straightened with a small exclamation of annoyance. She had found nothing. The match died. Darkness returned. Miss Marple waited until the princess's footsteps receded toward the hotel. Then she moved to the rosebed. The broken crimson glory had been removed. Tidied away by the gardeners, no doubt. But a second stem, lower down, had been snapped and the bloom carried off. She measured, 4 feet 2 inches from the ground. Someone shorter than Captain Blaine. She followed the secondary path toward the orangery. The glass panes were black with night, but a faint luminosity came from within. She tried the handle. The door was locked. Through the glass she discerned the white shape of the night-blooming cereus. Its petals furled like a closed umbrella. A thermometer on the wall read 18 decene stacks. A notebook lay open on the potting bench, its pages weighted by a trowel. She could not enter, but she noted the position of the lock, new Yale pattern, the key still in the door on the inside. A rustle in the shrubbery. She stepped back into the shadow of a bay tree. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann emerged from the side path, coat unbuttoned, a dark lantern in her hand. She moved with purpose, not stealth, and unlocked the orangery door. The light within sprang up, electric harsh. Miss Marple watched through the glass as the botanist consulted the notebook, adjusted a thermometer, and snipped a single leaf from a smaller plant. She worked quickly, methodically, then extinguished the light and relocked the door. As she turned, the lantern beam swept the path, and Miss Marple saw, caught on a twig, a thread of pale green wool. Frau Doctor plucked it free and walked away toward the hotel's west wing. Miss Marple waited 5 minutes, then retraced her steps. At the yew arch, she paused again. Something white gleamed against the dark trunk, a scrap of paper folded small. She unfolded it by torchlight. A single line, typed on the hotel's crested stationery. "Meet me at the arch. 11:55, urgent. F." The O was misaligned. She slipped the note into her pocket. The return journey took her past the fountain of Narcissus. The bronze youth gazed eternally at his reflection. Water trickled from the urn with a sound like muffled weeping. On the basin's rim lay a man's glove. Pale suede, the right hand, a button missing. She recognized it from the police photograph. Someone had dropped it here, or placed it deliberately. She left it where it lay. Back in the lilac room, she locked the door and spread her gleanings on the writing desk. The second pearl, the typed note, the thread of green wool. She added to her Morocco notebook, 11:17 p.m., Princess I, at Rosebed, searching. 11:29 p.m., Frau Dr. H in Orangery, 4 mins leaf taken. Glove, right, at Fountain, deliberate. Note, 11:55 appointment, typed, O misaligned. She underlined the time 11:55 3 times. Before returning to bed, she opened the window. The moon had slipped behind a cloud. The gardens lay in darkness. Somewhere, a nightingale sang once, then was silent. Miss Marple closed the casement and drew the curtains. She did not sleep immediately. She lay reviewing the pattern. A rose, a glove, a note, a meeting that ended in death. Someone had lured the Count to the arch. Someone else had fired the shot. A third had arranged the scene. 3 people, or 2, or 1 wearing different masks. At length she slept, dreaming not of Vienna, but of little paddocks, where old Miss Hartnell had once found a body, the goldfish pond, and the clue had been a missing galosh. The parallel was not exact, but human nature, as she often remarked, repeats itself with minor variations. She woke at 6 to the sound of church bells from the city. The envelope of gravel lay on the nightstand. The pearls gleamed like tiny moons. She rose, performed her toilet, and dressed in dove-grey wool with a collar of white piqué. At 7:30, she descended to breakfast. The winter garden was empty save for Maître Antoine, who stood beside the buffet arranging grapefruit with geometrical precision. He bowed. "Good morning, mademoiselle. You are early." "I find the air stimulating," Miss Marple replied. "Tell me, did the Count receive any messages last night?" The valet's hands paused over a silver salver. "One, delivered by the hall porter at 11:40. I placed it on his desk." "Typed?" "I believe so." Miss Marple helped herself to a boiled egg. "And the glove? Did you notice it missing from his dressing room?" Maître Antoine's composure flickered. "The Count wore only the left glove when he left the library. The right was on the blotter. I assumed he carried it." Miss Marple tapped the egg thoughtfully. "Curious. A man does not usually walk in gardens with one glove on and one off." She ate her egg in silence. Outside, the gardeners were at work again, raking the paths with monastic devotion. She watched them through the glass and saw Johann the night porter speak to the head gardener. Then glanced toward the hotel. Their eyes met hers. They looked away. At 8 o'clock, Inspector Keller appeared, coat unbuttoned, a folder under his arm. "Fräulein, a word. The glove has been found, at the fountain. And a second note, identical to the first, was discovered in the Count's wastepaper basket, torn in half." Miss Marple laid down her spoon. "Then we have a lure, Inspector, and a lure implies a murderer." Keller's moustache bristled. "The house party assembles again at 10. Perhaps you will join us." Miss Marple inclined her head. "I shall bring my knitting. It helps me think." She returned upstairs to fetch her needles and the ball of fleecy wool. As she opened the door, a small white envelope lay on the carpet. Inside was a single red rose petal and a line in pencil. "Mind your own business, little mouse." The handwriting was educated, the pressure heavy. She placed the petal between the pages of her notebook and went down to meet the suspects. The click of her needles steady as a heartbeat. Chapter 6. The Serious Alibi. The library at 10 o'clock had the atmosphere of a tribunal. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, striking dust motes into gold, but the air felt heavy, as though the books themselves held their breath. Inspector Keller stood beside the marble mantel. On the table lay the torn note, the glove, the envelope of gravel, and the 2 pearls now threaded on a strand of cotton for clarity. The house party arranged itself in a loose semicircle. Lady Letitia pale in dove-grey, Captain Blaine twitching a cigarette, Princess Irina examining her nails, Mr. Hartmann polishing his spectacles with unnecessary vigour, Frau Dr. von Hoffmann rigid as a grenadier, Maître Antoine a silent shadow by the door. Keller cleared his throat. "New evidence. Fräulein Marple will explain." Miss Marple laid her knitting on her lap. The needles clicked once, then were still. She spoke in the mild tone she might have used to discuss the church flower rota. "Last night I walked in the gardens. I found a second appointment note, 11:55, typed on hotel stationery, the O misaligned. It was wedged against the U trunk. The Count was lured to the arch. He arrived gloved only on the left hand, carrying the right glove. Someone met him, someone shorter than the Count, who snapped a rose at 4 feet 2 inches and later placed it between his lips. She paused. The needles resumed their gentle rhythm. Someone else fired the shot. The angle is wrong for suicide. The exit wound higher than the entry. The body was dragged 6 inches backward. Johann saw the cape caught beneath the heel. The glove was dropped at the fountain, perhaps in haste, perhaps to mislead. Captain Blaine crushed his cigarette in a Meissen dish. Anyone could have typed a note. Indeed, Miss Marple agreed, but the typewriter in the writing room has a misaligned O. I tested it this morning. The ribbon is new, ink still glossy, as on the suicide note. The same machine. Princess Irina's cigarette holder trembled. I was in my room. Your maid left you at 11:50, Keller said. After that, no witness. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann spoke for the first time. I was in the orangery. The Sirius flowered at 11:12. I photographed it every 15 minutes. The head gardener sat with me from 11:15 until 1. Miss Marple inclined her head. The temperature log shows the door opened at 11:47 and closed at 12:03. 16 minutes, enough to walk to the arch, return, and relock the door. The botanist's cheeks flushed. I stepped out for air. The atmosphere was close. Yet you took a dark lantern, Miss Marple said gently, and snipped a leaf from a smaller plant. I watched through the glass. Silence. Hartmann gave a low whistle. Keller produced the logbook. The gardener confirms he dozed between 11:40 and 12. He cannot swear the doctor did not leave. Frau Doctor's hands clenched. The Sirius is my alibi. It blooms once a year. I would not risk my research. Unless, Miss Marple said, the research required the Count's death. He threatened to destroy the specimen rather than let you have it. You needed a cutting. A dead man cannot refuse. Lady Letitia gave a small, distressed sound. Keller raised a hand. Captain Blaine, you searched the arch last night at 11:47. Why? Blaine flushed. I dropped my cigarette case. Thought it might be there. Miss Marple opened her notebook. You were seen at 12:17 by Johann, running from the west wing. You had no cigarette case then. Blaine's jaw worked. All right, I heard the shot. Went to look, found him dead, panicked. You moved the body, Keller said flatly. Only a little. Thought it looked wrong for suicide. Didn't want scandal. Princess Irina laughed, a brittle sound. Scandal! You owed him 30,000 shillings. Suicide voids the debt. Hartmann leaned forward. Say, Princess, you were pretty keen on those vineyards yourself, and the Count was selling to me. Felix promised me, she flashed. Promises are sacred. Miss Marple's needles clicked. The rose petal left in my room this morning. Your handwriting, Princess. A warning. You feared I knew about the forged option papers. The Princess went very still. I know nothing of forgeries. Keller produced a document. This option, signed by the Count, witnessed by Captain Blaine. The signature is a tracing. We compared it with the Count's will. The pressure lines do not match. Blaine sprang up. I didn't sit down, Keller said. 2 officers appeared at the door. Miss Marple continued, unruffled. The plan was clever. Frau Doctor poisons the tokay, untraceable alkaloid from the Sirius leaf. The Count staggers to the arch, already dying. Captain Blaine follows, fires the pistol to simulate suicide, forges the note on the Count's machine. Princess Irina provides the typewriter ribbon and the rose, red for betrayal. Maître Antoine arranges the corpse, adds the flourish of the flower in the mouth, a neat division of labour. Maître Antoine bowed faintly. I merely dressed my master for his coffin. Keller snapped handcuffs on Blaine. You will come with me. The princess rose, regal even in defeat. I demand my consul. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann stared at the serious photograph on the table, her alibi in ruins. Hartmann shook his head. Well, I'll be damned. Miss Marple gathered her knitting. The gardens at night are very revealing, Inspector. So many footsteps where only one set should be. Lady Letitia pressed her hand. Jane, how can I ever thank you? By serving proper English tea at 4 o'clock, Miss Marple said, and perhaps a slice of seed cake. The library doors closed behind the prisoners. Sunlight struck the dust motes into a brief, golden dance, then settled. Miss Marple climbed the stairs to the lilac room, opened her notebook, and wrote in her neat slanting hand. Case closed. Motive, greed, fear, science. Method, poison, pistol, rose. Moral, never trust a night-blooming flower. She closed the book, drew the curtains against the afternoon glare, and allowed herself the small, satisfied smile of a knitter who has completed a difficult pattern without dropping a stitch. Chapter 7. The Rose and the Glove. The arrests had been made at noon. By 3 o'clock the Garten Palast had settled into the stunned quiet that follows a thunderstorm. Footmen moved on tiptoe, guests cancelled excursions, and the string quartet in the Palm Court played only the slow movement of a Haydn quartet, as though louder music might disturb the dead. Miss Marple, however, had no intention of allowing the case to rest upon the confessions of 3 agitated people. Confessions, she had often remarked, were like railway tickets, valid only when punched by the guard of truth. She took her tea in the winter garden, alone. The fountain played its monotonous tune. A single red rose floated in the basin, placed there by some sentimental chambermaid. Miss Marple ate 1 cucumber sandwich, declined the second, and requested a second pot of hot water. While she waited, she opened her Morocco notebook to a fresh page and wrote in small, precise letters, Poison in Tokay, Frau Doctor's alkaloid. Forged option, Captain Blaine's tracing. Typed notes, Princess Irina's ribbon. Arrangement of corpse, Maître Antoine's flourish. The glove. She underlined the last line twice. The glove puzzled her. The right-hand sweat had been found at the fountain, yet the Count had left the library wearing only the left. Maître Antoine swore he had seen the right glove on the blotter at 11:25. Someone had carried it to the arch, dropped it en route, or placed it deliberately. She needed to see the Count's dressing room. Lady Letitia, still pale but steadier, accompanied her. The Count's suite occupied the entire southeast corner of the first floor. A sitting room panelled in walnut, a bedroom with a vast rococo bed, and a dressing room lined with mirrors and wardrobes of cedar. Maître Antoine was there, packing shirts with the calm of a man folding linen for a funeral that had already occurred. Miss Marple addressed him mildly. The Count's gloves, were they kept in a particular drawer? The valet opened a shallow drawer. Inside lay 3 pairs of evening gloves, each in its tissue nest. The top pair was pale suede, identical to the one at the fountain. The right glove of this pair had a small darn at the base of the thumb. The Count disliked darns, Maître Antoine said. He discarded this pair last week. I intended to give them to the second footman. Miss Marple lifted the glove. The stitching was minute, almost invisible. Yet the glove at the fountain has no darn. Maître Antoine's eyes flickered. Then it is from another pair. Or, Miss Marple said, the darn was added after the murder to suggest the glove was the Count's own discarded one. A small deception, but revealing. She turned to the blotter on the dressing table. A faint indentation showed where the right glove had lain. Beside it, a circular stain, Tokay perhaps. She sniffed, the sweet heavy scent of the wine, and beneath it something sharper, like crushed almonds. Lady Letitia shuddered. Cyanide? No, Miss Marple said. The serious alkaloid is odourless. This is merely Tokay. But the glass, where is it? Maître Antoine produced a crystal tumbler from a side table. A sediment of sugar crystals clung to the bottom. The rim bore a faint smear of lipstick, rose pink. The Count did not wear lipstick, Miss Marple observed. The valet's composure cracked like thin ice. I cleaned the glass this morning. It was as I found it. Miss Marple opened the wardrobe. Evening cloaks hung in a sombre row. She examined the one the Count had worn. Black broadcloth, silk-lined. In the inside pocket, she found a small mother-of-pearl card case. Inside was a single card, Princess Irina's, the corner turned down in the Russian fashion to indicate urgency. Lady Letitia read it aloud. Midnight, the Arch, come alone, typed of course. Miss Marple closed the case. The princess lured him, but she did not fire the shot. They descended to the library. Inspector Keller was at the desk comparing signatures. He looked up, weary. The princess admits the forgery. Blaine traced the signature from a letter. She supplied the ribbon. Frau Doctor confesses the poison, a concentrated extract injected into the Tokay bottle with a hypodermic. Blaine fired the pistol. Antoine arranged the body, a perfect chain. Miss Marple shook her head. Almost perfect. The glove is wrong, and the rose. She laid the darned glove beside the one from the fountain. The difference was clear. One thumb mended, one pristine. Keller frowned. Antoine swapped them. Antoine, Miss Marple said, arranged the corpse after death. He would know the Count discarded the darned pair. He took the good glove from the drawer, carried it to the Arch, and dropped it at the fountain to suggest flight. But why? Maître Antoine entered at that moment, summoned by a footman. His face was a mask. Miss Marple spoke gently. You loved your master, did you not, and in your fashion? The valet's eyes filled. He was my life for 20 years. Then why the rose in his mouth? A mockery. Antoine's voice was a whisper, not mockery. A message, read for betrayal. He betrayed us all, sold the vineyards, gambled away the estate, planned to marry the American's daughter for money. I placed the rose so the world would know. Keller leaned forward. You moved the body? I straightened the cloak, adjusted the glove. The pistol was already there. Captain Blaine's doing. I added the rose from the Count's own buttonhole. He carried it for the princess. A lover's token, he said. I thought it fitting. Miss Marple nodded. And the lipstick on the glass? Antoine hesitated. The princess brought the Tokay herself at 11:20. She said it was a peace offering. The Count drank. She kissed the jester rim. Her colour is rose pink. Then she left. He was already drowsy. Keller made a note. We have enough. The chain holds. Miss Marple gathered her knitting. One more thing. The pearl earring found in the gravel. Princess Irina's. It broke in the struggle when Blaine tried to place the pistol in the Count's hand. The Count, even dying, resisted. That is why the angle is wrong. She rose. The gardens have told their story, Inspector. The rest is paperwork." That evening, the house party dined in silence. The red salon was closed. The portrait of Franz Josef gazed down upon an empty room. Miss Marple took a light supper in her room. Clear soup, a poached egg, a glass of milk. She wrote letters, one to Mrs. Bantry, one to her nephew Raymond, one to the vicar of Little Paddocks, requesting that the church bells be rung, muffled on Sunday, in memory of a man who had died far from home. At 10 o'clock she walked once more in the gardens. The moon was waning. The yew arch looked merely old and tired. She paused at the rosebed. The gardeners had pruned the broken stems. New buds already showed. She picked one crimson petal, pressed it between the pages of her notebook, and returned to the hotel. In the hall she met Lady Letitia, wrapped in a travelling cloak. "I am leaving tomorrow, Jane. The place feels cursed." Miss Marple patted her arm. "It is only human beings who curse, Letty. The gardens will bloom again next year." She climbed the stairs, entered the lilac room, and packed her cabin trunk with the same neatness she had unpacked it. The Morocco notebook went into the dressing case beside the unused revolver. She set her alarm for 6 and slept without dreaming. At dawn the Orient Express waited at the Festbahnhof, steam pluming into the cold air. Miss Marple took her seat in the wagonlit, arranged her travelling rug, and opened her knitting. As the train pulled out, she looked back once at the Gartenpalast, its yellow walls already touched with rose by the rising sun. Somewhere in its gardens a nightingale sang, belated and solitary. She counted stitches, the needles clicking like a quiet heartbeat. Human nature, she reflected, was much the same in Vienna as in Little Paddocks. Only the roses were larger. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The Orient Express thundered westward through the Vienna woods, its wheels singing on the rails with the steady insistence of a metronome. Miss Marple sat by the window of her compartment, the grey tweed travelling rug across her knees, her knitting needles moving with unhurried precision. A small pile of completed squares, destined for the Little Paddocks baby's hospital, lay folded in tissue paper on the seat beside her. Outside, the landscape slid past in watercolour washes. Silver birches, red-roofed villages, the Danube glinting like a drawn sword. She had solved the puzzle, the arrests were made, yet the final stitch, she felt, remained to be placed. At noon, the dining car, steward, announced luncheon. Miss Marple laid aside her needles and walked the swaying corridor to the restaurant car. The tables were set with starched linen and heavy silver. The menu offered Vienna, schnitzel or trout with almonds. She chose the trout and a glass of Wuslauer water. At the far end of the car sat Inspector Keller, travelling incognito in a brown tweed suit, a newspaper spread before him. He rose and bowed. "Fräulein Marple, may I join you?" She inclined her head. He took the opposite seat. "The case is closed," he said without preamble. "The princess has signed a full confession. Blaine is hysterical, claims the pistol went off by accident. Frau Dr. von Hoffmann demands access to her laboratory notes. Maître Antoine asks only that his master's body be sent to the family vault at Artenburg." Miss Marple unfolded her napkin. "And the vineyards?" "Reverted to the estate. Mr. Hartmann has withdrawn his offer. Says the publicity is bad for business." The trout arrived, golden and fragrant. Miss Marple tasted it and nodded approval. "There is one small matter," she said. "The rose in the Count's mouth. Maître Antoine called it a message, red for betrayal. Yet the rose came from the Count's own buttonhole. intended for the princess. Who betrayed whom? Keller buttered a roll. The princess says the count promised marriage as well as the vineyards. When he changed his mind, she forged the option to force his hand. Blaine needed the money to cover his debts. Frau Doctor needed the serious cutting. Antoine, well, he loved the old Austria. The count was selling everything. Miss Marple sipped her water. A conspiracy of disappointed hopes, but the poison, was it meant to kill? Frau Doctor swears the dose was calculated to stupefy only, enough to make the count sign the forged papers. Blaine panicked when the count staggered into the garden and fired to finish the business. Miss Marple laid down her fork. Then the suicide note? Typed by the princess earlier in the evening. She intended to confront the count at midnight, force the signature, leave the note as a blind. Blaine used it after the shot. The train plunged into a tunnel. Darkness swallowed the car for a moment. Then sunlight flashed back. Miss Marple resumed eating. And the glove at the fountain? Antoine's flourish. He hoped to suggest a fleeing assassin. The darn was his own work. He is clever with a needle. Miss Marple nodded. A valet's pride. He could not bear his master to look untidy, even in death. Coffee was served, thick, sweet, Viennese. Keller stirred his with a spoon. You will return to England? Tomorrow. The boat train from Ostend connects with the Golden Arrow. I shall be home by Saturday tea time. Keller smiled faintly. Your village will seem dull after Vienna. Miss Marple permitted herself a small smile. Murders occur in villages, Inspector. Only the Giaish scenery is smaller. They finished the meal in companionable silence. At the corridor, Keller paused. The Sicherheitsdirektion direction is grateful. If ever you visit Vienna again, I shall bring my own tea, Miss Marple said firmly. The continental blend is too strong. Back in her compartment, she took up her knitting again. The train climbed through the Semmering Pass. Snow-capped peaks rose on either side. She reviewed the case as one might review a completed piece of embroidery, checking for flaws. Lure, Princess Irina's note and rose. Poison, Frau Doctor's alkaloid. Shot, Captain Blaine's panic. Arrangement, Maître Antoine's devotion. Clues, glove, pearls, silk, pollen, typed O, all accounted for. Yet one thread nagged. The lipstick on the tokay glass. Rose pink, the princess's shade, but the smear was on the inside rim. A kiss leaves its mark on the outside. She opened her notebook and added a final line. Lipstick inside glass. Deliberate plant. She underlined it, then closed the book. Some questions, she reflected, were better left to the police. At Munich, they changed engines. A porter brought afternoon tea on a tray. Thin bread and butter, a pot of Earl Grey, 2 slices of apple strudel. Miss Marple ate with appreciation. The strudel reminded her of the Gartenpalast kitchens. She wondered if the chef would find employment now that the house party was dispersed. Dusk fell early. The train crossed the Rhine at Bosel. Lights twinkled along the river like scattered jewels. Miss Marple drew the blind, turned on the reading lamp, and took from her dressing case a small leather folder. Inside lay the pressed rose petal from the yew-arch, the thread of lilac silk, the 2 pearls now reunited on a safety pin. She added the envelope of blood-flecked gravel and the scrap of paper with the princess's warning. Souvenirs, not of Vienna, but of human frailty. At 10 o'clock the attendant made up her berth. She undressed, said her prayers and climbed between the crisp sheets. The train rocked her gently, the wheels repeating a lullaby. Justice, justice, justice. She slept. She woke once at the French border. Customs officers moved along the corridor, stamping passports. She showed hers, renewed the previous year for Florence, and received a courteous bonsoir. The train moved on. Dawn found them crossing the flat fields of Flanders. Church spires rose against a pearl sky. Cows grazed in water meadows. At Ostend, the sea smelled of salt and tar. Miss Marple breakfasted on coffee and croissants, then boarded the Channel steamer. The crossing was smooth. Gulls wheeled above the wake. The Golden Arrow waited at Dover, gleaming green and gold. She took her seat in a first-class compartment, already occupied by a clergyman reading the Times and a young woman in a green coat, knitting a scarlet jumper. Miss Marple smiled at the coincidence and opened her own needles. At Victoria, she was met by Raymond's chauffeur. The Bentley purred through London suburbs, then out into the familiar lanes of Kent. Danemead Cottage stood waiting, its windows glowing in the twilight. Cherry had lit the fire. The kettle sang on the hob. Mrs. Bantry arrived within the hour, hat askew, eyes bright with curiosity. "Well, Jane, was it murder?" Miss Marple poured tea, proper English tea, strong and hot. 4 people, Dolly. Greed, fear, science, and loyalty. The gardens were moonlight and deceptive, but the clues were small things. A glove, a rose, a typed O. Mrs. Bantry accepted a slice of Madeira cake. And the Count? Betrayed by those he trusted. But then he betrayed them first. They sat in companionable silence while the fire crackled. Outside, the Michaelmas daisies nodded in the evening breeze. Miss Marple took up her knitting again, counting stitches with calm precision. Human nature, she reflected, was a pattern repeated wherever roses bloomed and moonlight fell. One had only to observe the small fatal stitches to see the whole design.